already had item 10E. We're going to go to 10F. Consider Housing Element Annual Progress Report, APR, for 2016 and direct staff to transmit the report to the California State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. David?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. The housing element is one of 7 required elements in the city's general plan. The general plan is the city's comprehensive long-range guide for how and where the community should grow and develop into the future. The general plan covers a broad range of topics, including land use, transportation, and housing. The state of California mandates that local jurisdictions, like San Bruno, prepare and adopt local general plans and housing elements. Housing elements describe the measures and programs that local communities adopt to facilitate the construction of housing units towards satisfying that community's assigned housing production goals. The local housing goals are referred to as the community's Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA for short. The RHNA is assigned by the state of California through the local community's Regional Council of Governments. San Bruno's Regional Council of Governments is ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. The RHNA assigned takes into account both the type of local demand for housing in terms of the income levels for housing needed, as well as the potential for local communities to produce the needed housing. Local communities are required periodically to submit an updated housing element to the State of California's Department of Housing and Community Development for review and certification. The purpose of this certification process is to ensure that the measures and programs proposed by the local community can be determined appropriate and feasible toward satisfying the local community's assigned housing goals. San Bruno last submitted and received certification for its housing element in 2015. The certification period for this current housing element is 2015 through 2023. The State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, requires an annual review of a certified housing element. This annual review is referred to the Annual Progress Report, or APR. This APR is to be submitted by April 1 of each year to the State Office of HCD and the Office of Housing and Planning and Research. At this point, I'd like to go forward and talk about our current 2016 Annual Progress Report. So, what is the purpose of the APR, or Annual Progress Report? The objective of the APR is to evaluate the progress in the following areas: housing activity across the various affordability levels. How are we doing as far as meeting regional housing needs allocation, the RHNA? How are we doing locally to remove constraints to housing development? And how are we doing in terms of implementing the housing measures and programs in our housing element? This past year in 2016, the City of San Bruno did move forward with a number of housing projects. We issued building permits for a total of 87 units. And those 87 units are 83 at the Plaza apartment project, the former El Camino Cinema site, and then also scattered throughout the community 4 second dwelling units. At this point, we're 2 years into an 8-year RHNA cycle. So where are we in terms of housing production? As far as the housing production is concerned, like most communities, it's very difficult in this environment of low housing production and a significant increase in jobs here in this region to provide housing to meet all economic sectors. And like most communities, San Bruno is experiencing a situation where we're able to produce some housing at the moderate and above moderate levels, but it's extremely difficult to provide housing at the lower income levels. So for example, thus far, 2 years into this cycle, we have not produced any housing in the category of very low, 4 units in the category of low, 41 this past year, 42 total in the category of moderate. In the category of above moderate, we've produced a total of 51. At this point, 2 years in, we've produced 97 units toward our overall goal of 1,155 units. How does this compare with the prior cycle? The prior cycle was 2007 through 2014. At that time, our RHNA goal was 1,252 units. During that period, during that particular period, past period, we produced 764 units, about 61% of our goal. And through that entire period, 2007 through 2014, we only produced 8 units in the very low income category and 8 units in the low income category. This is not unusual. In this housing market, during this period of time, most communities are experiencing similar difficulty in producing housing units in the very low and low income groups or categories. And practically, in terms of the RHNA, the way the RHNA numbers are calculated and assembled, as you can see in the chart, what we experience here in this community and throughout the region is a tremendous amount of house sharing, home sharing. And in terms of home sharing, you're not really seeing those numbers represented here. So there is an intensification of how homes are being used, but that's not really reflected here. What's reflected here in the RHNA is how many units are produced and in what categories, given the ability to pay rent or pay a mortgage. As we've reported to you before, looking at the environment we're in, from 2010 through 2015, the average cost of a home here in San Bruno increased from, on average, $549,000 to currently about $900,000. And in terms of rents, the rents went from about, on average, $2,000 a unit to $3,200 a unit, respectively 64% and 63% increases. I think this is important to take a look at the RHNA and kind of understand what the ramifications might be. As you can understand, in this statewide housing crisis, our state legislature is looking at this situation and trying to determine what can be done to produce more housing and to identify more funding sources to provide for housing, particularly housing in the low and very low income categories. Currently, there are a packet of bills that are going through our state legislature here in California with the purpose of trying to streamline the construction of new housing, and again, as I stated, provide new funding for affordable housing. This is very important for this city and other cities and staff to watch and monitor. For example, there's a particular bill, SB 35, that is currently in committee and scheduled to go before the Legislative Governance and Finance Committee on March 22nd of this year. And this bill, SB 35, titled Planning and Zoning, Streamlining the Approval Process, would actually preempt local communities like San Bruno from a discretionary land use approval process for projects in a city where the city has not met its RHNA goals. And in particular, the focus of this bill is that projects that would be multifamily residential projects would be ministerial. In other words, there would not be the standard noticing, review by the public, the requirement for an environmental review, the requirement to meet local parking standards should SB 35 move forward and ultimately be adopted. So while history has been that the state reviews our housing elements, reviews our reports, our annual reports, the APRs, to make sure that we're making a good faith effort toward facilitating the construction of housing. We're not required to construct the housing. We are required to have measures and programs in place that will assist or facilitate the construction of housing to meet housing in these various income levels. However, given the crisis in the state in terms of not being able to produce enough housing, particularly affordable housing, the state legislature is looking at a number of bills to try to look at ways to improve this situation, allow for the construction of more housing and funding for more affordable housing. This is definitely something that we as a local community will need to track. So what have we been dealing with over time in terms of constraints locally, in terms of producing housing overall, and affordable housing? As we know, in 2012, we lost redevelopment. We've had Ordinance 1284, a local ordinance in place since 1977, that has constrained the number of residential units in terms of density to 1974 levels, has restricted above-ground parking garages, and has restricted building height to 3 stories or 50 feet. We also are in an area near to the San Francisco International Airport, and we have constraints in terms of there are areas where, because of noise, we cannot build housing. In addition, there was a California court decision in 2009 referred to as the Palmer decision that precluded local agencies like San Bruno from being able to require inclusionary housing, including affordable units in rental housing projects, apartment projects. So those are some of the constraints we've been dealing with. So in terms of moving forward and trying to address those constraints and put in place an overall program that was certified by HCD, Housing and Community Development, what are some things that we're doing? For example, we're in the process of updating our zoning code. The zoning code update is allowing us to look at various areas within our community that are currently zoned commercial that present perhaps opportunities for mixed-use projects and more housing opportunities. This is an opportunity, given the constraints, the SFO constraints, to identify other locations where we could place housing within the community. In addition, we're working on implementing our transit corridors plan. And as part of that, in 2014, Measure N was passed by 67%, which is allowing for increased building height, allowing for increased residential densities. And in terms of the TCP, or Transit Corridors Plan itself, adopted in 2013, we're seeing that we're allowing for increased residential densities and mixed-use development, and hoping to see about 1,610 residential units overall in the 155-acre plan area. The city approved the crossing project. The crossing project here in San Bruno near El Camino Real has 325 deed-restricted low and very low-income units. And that was done during the period of time that the city did enjoy the redevelopment agency and the funding it provided. On a regular basis, it's important, and we do, monitor those covenants, those deed restrictions, to ensure that those units continue to be in place. This past year, moving forward, the City Council adopted an affordable housing impact fee ordinance. This is very important. It did a number of things. It not only provided a funding source for us as new housing is being developed and as new commercial development is occurring within the community, it also was an opportunity for us to address the Palmer decision. It allowed the community to actually put back in place the opportunity on rental housing projects to collect an affordable housing impact fee. In addition, the city on a regular and annual basis provides funding support for HIP housing and shelter network to provide more housing opportunities within our community. kind of looking ahead, what's coming ahead for us? We still have 6 more years left in this RENA cycle to start with, and as I pointed out earlier, in the prior cycle, the community was able to actually build about 61% of its total goal or target. Still really challenged, like more communities out there, to get those housing units in the very low and low income categories, but still overall able to produce quite a bit of housing. As we look forward here over the next few years, we see opportunities in the downtown and the TCP area with improvements to our streetscape, with our comprehensive parking management plan and putting that in place, and working with our adopted transit corridors plan and Measure N to see hopefully many of those units, those 1,610 residential units, come to actually be within the TCP area. Already in the pipeline, we're working with developers on a project at 111 San Bruno Avenue, the former First National Bank building and the adjoining property next door. And the proposed project, an application that just recently came in, is for 60 condominiums above about 8,400 to 8,500 square feet of commercial on ground floor. As condominium units, we expect to see about 15% of those units affordable to low and moderate income households. In addition, our staff is working with a broad range of developers in the community on a variety of projects, many of them in the transit corridors plan area, and currently those projects total over 500 possible dwelling units here in San Bruno. And within many of those projects, there would be a set aside for affordable housing units. And this evening, you went ahead and you adopted the ADU ordinance, and the ADU ordinance will provide an opportunity for us to see some low and very low income housing come into our community. So with that, that's a summary of this year's 2016 annual progress report. We anticipate moving this forward to HCD upon your direction for their review and acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any questions from staff from the council? Mr. Riegel?
Robert Riegel, 7th Avenue. Could you just refresh my memory a little bit? You were talking about SB 35, I believe, and you said the state was usurping some of our requirements and that they would potentially reduce parking requirements that we may look at imposing, and something also about reducing the public review of proposed projects, or did I hear you wrong?
You didn't hear Mr. Woltering incorrectly, except for the fact that this is proposed legislation that has not yet been adopted by the legislature. We'd be happy to send you a little synopsis of that information. I stepped in front of David here because I wanted to make sure that the council also recognizes that in addition to watching what the state legislature is doing, that our League of California Cities is very proactive in terms of positions it takes, which has often been very effective in convincing the legislature that bad law is about to be produced by some of the legislative proposals like this one and others that we've seen in recent past. The legislature seems to be upping its game with respect to its interest to punish cities as opposed to work with cities to address the affordable housing crisis. And we're recommending as well that this continue to be something that the city is not only monitoring but is taking action as requested by the League of California Cities to weigh in with opposition to certain devastatingly difficult legislative proposals.
Thank you for your fighting on this.
All right, thank you.
Through the chair,
Irene?
I would like to suggest that we send a letter to whoever is appropriate, strongly opposing all of that, all of SB 35. I don't hear anything that's helpful or positive or anything, and strongly suggest that they find some something to replace redevelopment. That was the only thing that saved our city and the people who live in the low and very low income housing that we helped provide. And it's just critical that we have some more tools than what we do, I think. So I'd like to suggest we do that.
Okay, good idea.
If I could just chime in too, because I've been attending symposiums and part of organizations, mainly sponsored by the county, on housing, and the housing crisis and the gap between the jobs and the housing. And Sacramento has pretty much thumbed their nose at us, because how can the Bay Area complain about housing when when jobs are so good and everything, and they haven't budged on that. And now, only a few years after taking redevelopment, they want to make it even worse, and especially on the heels of trying to really hit us with the ADUs. So I mean, I agree with what Irene says. We should do something, and we should and really make a strong stand that these legislators have got to realize where they came from their own cities, and how difficult it was, and it was even difficult with redevelopment, and we had 10 good years of it, but there's another way, and I think I think the county and the communities are making concerted effort. We know what the problem is. Don't start penalizing us.
Okay, do you need a motion on this, or just a consensus to direct staff to mail?
No, we don't need do you need a motion on that? No, you've received the report, and we've received our direction. We don't need anything
Mail
else.
it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Irene's idea.
And Irene's thought about mailing something to Kevin Mullen and Senator Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically what we would do, and we will continue to do this when we see legislative proposals that require an opposition from the city to protect the interests that the council has been very clear in addressing. We send those letters to all of the members of the committees that are involved with review of the legislation, and to our local legislators, irrespective of whether or not they sit on that committee.
Good. Okay.
And the letter's great, and I was wondering, when it comes to our representatives, Mullen and Hill, if okay, maybe all 5 of us, if we're in concurrence, can sign that, so they all clearly understand that they have the city's view and they're elected.
Absolutely, we're happy to do that.
Thanks.